Hello and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Elijah Fleming.
I'm Colin McCormick.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're talking about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, a series created by Rick Riordan and Jonathan E. Steinberg for Disney+. And today we also have an extra special guest who's been working on some of our mini-sodes with Christy, Hannah Bazinaw. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi. Thank you for the woo, Christy.
Always here for the woo.
So yeah, you guys have been going through with like a fine-tooth comb in your mini-sodes. But today we're going to talk about kind of the series as a whole, which I think is very exciting. So our first question, and Hannah, I'll go to you. Do you dig this series?
Yeah, a lot, actually. I think if people wanted like a beat-by-beat recreation of the books, the musical is right there. I think this does what an adaptation should do. I think it enhances storylines that were problematic at some point in time. It makes it better. So I really dig it. I have my problems with it, but I like it a lot.
I mean, if there was nothing to critique, then what would be the point of this show?
Yeah.
There's always something to critique.
Does that mean, should I go?
Go for it, Christy.
Okay. I feel like going through it with a fine-tooth comb every week has confused me so much of whether I really enjoy it or am really frustrated with it. It's giving me the feelings that like Indiana Jones gives of like, okay, I love it for the nostalgia aspect that and like all the famous lines and all of the stuff like that, because, you know, that's what the community is built around and really enjoys. But there's parts of it that I find so frustrating that kind of knocks me out of the suspension. I don't know, like that holds me back. And I think I'm overthinking it too much to like just fully enjoy what it was meant to be, especially as like, I don't even want to say children's, like a young adult storyline. I will say the characters and the casting for all the characters, with one exception, were amazing. Like, I have no complaints of any cast member except Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hermes. Because, like, he phoned it in. Everyone else, amazing. Loved it.
He was the one I was noticing, because I was, just before we started, I watched the last episode. I was watching the like making of documentary, and they had most of the guest stars. Like Jay Duplass was in like a bunch of scenes. All of the actors were kind of talking and commenting, and he was one somewhat conspicuous absence. But you know, he's probably a very busy person, so I don't think that necessarily reflects poorly on him. But
and you think the Edge isn't a very busy person?
Fair.
The Edge,
yeah. Or is it just Edge? I don't know. Andy so when I mentioned that to Andy, that he was in this playing Ares, he's like, oh, damn, I might watch it now.
I thought he did a great job. He was a good Ares.
He was awesome.
Yeah. No,
last episode, he really sold it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How about Colin, you tell us if you dig it, and then we'll leave Lige last, because we have heard nothing from Lige so far.
This is true. Lige is the real kind of unknown equation in this, variable in this equation. Generally, yes, I dig it. Again, like I wonder, kind of to Christy's point, is sometimes thinking too closely about acts of reception and picking over and really analyzing it. Has it inured me or ruined me or, you know, dulled my ability to love things? But no, I think I enjoy.
So cynical.
It's sometimes I walk away from things. I'm like, would I enjoy this more if I didn't think about it? But
yes, is the answer.
But whether or not that's the right or wrong way to view art is a discussion for another time. But generally, yeah, I appreciated it and I liked it. I liked that it felt like it was answering, like sometimes with a lot of media these days, we ask the question of like, did this need to exist? This came up a lot when we were just talking about Hunger Games, right? Mm-hmm. Did this need to be created? And I think this did fill somewhat of a calling where there is a huge fan base out there of people that love this series and felt disappointed by earlier Hollywood adaptations, which is a feeling I can empathize with. And that this series, for, you know, the shortcomings or missed opportunities that we could point to, I think did a good job like answering that call. It was generally enjoyable. I really liked a lot of the actors, particularly the main three, Walker, Leah, and Arian. I thought they were great and delightful at what is a not easy job to sort of act at that age for characters that age, and with a lot of, I'm sure, no small amount of expectations and pressure. So I thought they were all tremendous. And, it seemed like a project that was created with the, Riordan's blessing, and it sort of was created from a place of goodwills. Did I enjoy every second of it? But overall, yes, I think I dug it.
Nice.
I was not expecting it. I was not expecting you to like it, honestly.
Broken clock is right twice a day, sometimes, something like that. But
okay, yeah.
All right,
Eli?
Lige.
All right, what do you got? Are you going to be the
right.
dissenting opinion?
I mean, probably.
Nice.
I don't super dig this, but I think it's a me problem and not a show problem. I agree that I think this seems to have come from a place of really wanting to do this story justice. And I think I've only read the first book and it was a really long time ago. And it seemed like these characters were much more true to the book, even if it wasn't like a play-by-play. But the characters felt more true, legitimate, authentic, yes. And just kind of the way that they staged some of the conflicts between them, it felt better than some of the other adaptations, I think. But I just don't generally dig this story. I think I've realized it's very old school YA chosen one storyline, and it has become I think a little old for me, and I just don't dig the story of it all. And I still think, okay,
I'm not disagreeing with you. What I was going to say is actually the chosen one storyline does actually get a bit more complicated in the later books. And I know we're talking about season 1, so I'm not how dare you? But it's just the prophecy is vague, and it's about a child of the big 3 will fulfill this. And so at some point in time, we have 4 children of the big 3 who could all be this prophesized hero. And Talia is actually Thalia, whatever.
Is it Talia or Thalia? Is there a definitive answer on that one?
They're saying it as Thalia in the show, which I hate. I've always said it as Talia, and that's how I've heard a lot of people say it.
Talia feels right to me, but...
Talia feels right. She's named after a muse, too, so however that's pronounced.
It would be Talia. Ask me later, but there's a whole thing about the way stop consonants work in ancient Greek. But, sorry.
Ooh, interesting. Anyways, Talia is a day from turning 16 and being the prophecy kid, and then she's actually I'm going to join the Hunters of Artemis, and then that puts Percy in the I'm now the prophecy kid position. So she kind of I don't blame her, but she kind of him over last minute.
And I think to Elijah's point too of the chosen one, we've talked about this before. I think we talked about with Blood of Zeus is I think we've talked about how I hate Greek heroes in terms of they're really boring. They're shitty. They're kind of boring. And so when you are trying to recreate them, I like the attempt to recreate Percy because a sassy 12-year-old is kind of fun. That's why the chemistry with the other people and him is really fun. But the storyline itself is just, it doesn't feel original.
Damn, you think?
Well, this prompts a question for me that I want to ask the three of you of, is this kind of, are we putting to the test the sort of thesis of Joseph Campbell, the idea that there is an story that is evergreen, that always works, and everybody keeps coming back to the same kind of story. And I think one of the criticisms that is correctly levied against sort of hero's journey narratives is that the sameness that they can kind of be, the reductiveness, the way they get the same kind of protagonists, they tend to be sort of singular, individualistic, underscore male, able-bodied. There's certain normative things about them that tends to happen. And is are we starting to see the paint is starting to dry and crack on this kind of model? This narrative model, if it was a thing, can only really go so far before we actually do start craving new kinds of stories.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, again, the problem is also tied to the age for which the books were originally written, where you have to simplify a lot of things. You versus books that can still have that narrative, often have just different perspectives, darker storylines that is more engaging for a mature audience. And I think that, I think of Greek myths in a way that Riordan probably did, right? Like there's a way that you can easily make them darker. You can have a gritty Odysseus suffering from PTSD, and right, like from Circe. Or you can just be like, so this guy went on a boat trip and saw a bunch of stuff. Like they can go either direction. And I think it's harder for them to be simplified and be enjoyable for a mature audience, which is what Riordan was doing. That his audience was his son initially. So that's totally understandable. And that's just maybe why it doesn't appeal to all audiences in that way.
And I think, again, that this is why it's like a me problem and not the show problem, is that I think that, and we all kind of know that like Greek myths are kind of nasty and really horrible things happen to people in Greek myths. And a lot of the gods are absolute assholes. And I think, having it sanitized kind of makes it, not as enjoyable if I feel like there's not enough nuance. But again, I feel like that's definitely a me problem and not a show problem. And I do think they attempt to like address that, right? Like they have this conflict in world of the gods are assholes and they do terrible things and ignore their children. And I think they do try to negotiate with like, the importance of power and responsibility and things like that, which is good. And as you should in a story like these. But again, I think it's just not for me.
Yeah, that's fair. The sanitization of it, first of all, some parts of it were sanitized by Disney, which like I was kind of upset about.
Yeah.
Just kill the abuser at the end of the show, okay? Just straight up do it. And like don't frame it as like, oh, it was an accident. No, I liked when Sally stone cold killed him and then sold his body as a statue and got a shit ton of money.
Incredible.
And then she was set up. Yeah. I was going to say, like, the sanitization you're talking about, I feel like that's definitely something that, like, starts in the first book because it's such an introduction. And then, like, the books get progressively darker. Like, spoilers for, like, the Heroes of Olympus series, but Percy bloodbends a god and almost kills her. And they start calling him, like, God Killer. So it definitely starts to question, like, what makes a monster? What makes a hero? Who is truly responsible for these things? Like, what are the implications of power? It does get more in depth, but the first book is definitely the most simplified version of it. And I can see that like Disney sanitized it even further.
Well, like as it should be, right? Yeah.
It started as like a bedtime story he was telling his son to basically like work his son into stories. So it's not going to be the most, it's not going to be for Rashomon or something like that.
Have y'all ever read the book Watership Down?
Unfortunately.
Oh, yes. I love Watership Down. What are you talking about, unfortunately?
Oh my God, it made me cry. No, I sobbed.
I like it a lot. My dad wanted me to be cultured, so he read that to me as a bedtime story when I was like 9.
I sobbed. I could not stop crying.
It was a book/movie that it fell victim to this like weird like market. Like there's an animated film if you haven't seen, not the most recent Netflix one, there's like an older animated film, like a Don Bluth style animated film that didn't know kind of like who it was for, because it was like, well, like it's about rabbits and they talk and it will be a cartoon, so like it's for children, but there's like this horrifying dog, and General Wound Ward is this like ogre monster rabbit who like murders people, and like so lots of children, probably Eli and myself included, sounds like it, watched this like Watership Down animated and we're like, oh my God,
like this is all over my head.
Traumatized.
I have an equivalent though. My mom brought home a movie for me that was animated. She's like, oh, this one won an Academy Award. Like, it should be perfectly appropriate to show my young daughter. Oh, no. It was Princess Mononoke, and I enjoyed it immensely.
That was like an awakening. I can imagine.
She's like, whoa, not what I was expecting from a cartoon.
I have a massive Princess Mononoke poster just down the hall from here that I saw at a used bookstore, and I was like, this is coming home with me. It's like one of the original like Japanese posters with the
so good.
It's just the scene with her like with the blood over her mouth when she's sucking the wound out of Mara.
It's so good.
Anyways, that's like the Colin movie, but we can talk Mononoke later.
Maybe this is why our generations are so traumatized as the media are introduced to very young.
No, it's the Brave Little Toaster. That's the one.
Yeah.
Oh, that did scare me. Oh God.
What if your appliances could feel pain, like existential angst, and like be like feel neglect? But
I don't want to think that.
I still worry about that with like my stuffed animals. My Squishmallows. I feel bad every time they drop.
Toy Story. That's what Toy Story did to y'all.
That was Toy Story. Yeah.
So we started at the very end with, murdering Gabe but we should start, I think, possibly with this question of, we finally get in the final episode, we get the Percy Poseidon meeting, like probably one of the big thematic things the show has been building up. This meeting between Percy and Poseidon, and the arc of Percy's sort of relationship with his father. So I guess my question is sort of twofold, which is, one, how did everybody feel about that? And two, right, is this different from sort of the source material, or is this more or less of a piece with the original work?
They talk a little bit more in the books. Poseidon does answer his question, and he says, like, Sally is a queen amongst women. I would have given her a palace in the sea with me if she would have taken it, which, Amphitrite,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
So it's basically the same thing. I liked it. It felt very representative of deadbeat dad style, deadbeat dad core, as if you will.
I did like the difference in outfits between Zeus and Poseidon in that moment right before, too, because you definitely got beach bum vibes from Poseidon, which I was...
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's his that's the vibe they shoot for in the books. I was actually really excited to see Zeus because that's his exact outfit, like, description from the books. I was very pleased with Zeus.
I was deeply saddened to see Lance Reddick. He's fantastic. Have you ever seen The Wire? Is probably his most famous, but he's also he's one of these actors that is just kind of like never phones it in. He's always great. If you played Horizon Zero Dawn, he's Silas. He's huge in those games. The best work he's ever done, though, is a Funny or Die video called Toys R Me, where he plays this despotic toy shop owner who's just the most intense human being. Because he has that, like, his whole persona is like, you will sit here and you will listen to what I will say and you will do exactly this. I am the king in this world. That is his whole, like, energy that he nails. When I saw him, and I was saddened because I was like, is this Lance Reddick's last on-screen performance? It very well may be. Yeah.
But he was so good.
He was.
He's a legend. He's fantastic.
He did really good.
So going back to Colin's original question, there seem to have been two major premises put forth at the beginning of this show. And one is with that conversation between Percy and his mom, Sally, of like, not everyone who's a monster looks like a monster, and not everyone who is said to be a hero is a god is. And like, we get that a little bit in this last episode with Percy is asked the question of like, oh, it's like, can't you just like send them an email? And it's like, where's the glory in that? It's like, I know, I'm tired of running away from monsters, saying that like in this case, Zeus is a monster. So you've got that, but I would argue that in the entire series, they never really ended up being clear on what makes something monstrous and what makes something not monstrous, basically. So I have problems with that theme. And then the other theme seems to be like, everyone has shitty parents, but Poseidon is like a glowing example of, but he's not that shitty of a parent. Along with Sally, right? Like maybe the reason that Percy is an exceptional demigod is because his mother and also his father actually cares about him in a way that a god can, makes him exceptional. And that seems to go against everything else that was happening. And I think that's something Hannah and I talked about a lot, was like they demonized Athena so much as Annabeth's mother. And they never really, Poseidon just got a better and better perception through the series. Would you agree with that assessment overall, Hannah?
I've never been a big Athena fan. But yeah, I kind of would like to see, like, I don't know. I think that I'm super tired. Something that like really bugged me in the books is that like Aphrodite and the Aphrodite cabin is always depicted as like a pink Barbie house, a pink Barbie dream house, and that all the Aphrodite girls, all the Aphrodite kids are so shallow and vain and they don't ever want to participate. And then just like, I don't know. I know like she's the goddess of like romantic love, but like I would still like to see like a better relationship, specifically for a goddess like that. Hermes obviously cares about Luke, even though he's not doing a great job. None of them are doing good jobs, actually. Let me clarify.
No.
Yeah, Hermes, Apollo, Demeter, Ares pays a little bit of attention to them. Those are the ones like off the top of my head that I can remember like actually showing some interest, minimal interest, let me clarify, minimal interest in their children throughout the books.
Yeah.
It sort of seems to me like one of the themes that kind of the show is kind of engaging with, like Christy was saying, that really gets analyzed in the train scene, and I think in episode 3 or 4, where Annabeth kind of explains to Percy that like we got to win our parents' love by like doing stuff, and if we can prove ourselves and achieve the desires that they hold value, you know, if I can be super smart and strategic and capable, I can win my mom's love. And Percy's rebuttal is like, that's not how love's supposed to work, right? You're not supposed to earn your parents' love. It should be
unconditional.
Thank you. That's the word, unconditional, right? And then Poseidon kind of proves
Must
that
be
at
nice.
the end. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing where, but like, I think that's the theme that is sort of introduced, and which is a really compelling and I think very important, particularly if this is first and foremost a show for younger audiences. Like that's a really big idea to sort of put out there. And Poseidon kind of wins over by proving at the end, basically, that, you know, his love for Percy is unconditional, although again, Percy also does kind of prove, you know, himself. So it seems like this is a theme that like a really good idea that's introduced, but maybe not fully followed through to fruition.
Yeah.
And maybe the fault is the hero's journey narrative, but
I would argue that Percy is kind of like an inverse of the traditional hero's journey narrative.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and now I'm trying to remember what I was thinking. Hold on. I lost it. I was thinking about it when you were talking about it, and then I'd lost it. I'll come back to it.
I was going to say, it's like, because I think I'm the only one who has never read the first book, at least. I think Colin and Elijah both have. This goes back to like a really early conversation Hannah and I had, was, you know, thinking about some of the changes made. Riordan is telling these stories to his son initially, right? And one of the major premises is like, parents suck and they f you up, basically. And I'm wondering if like 10 years later or so, he's like, maybe I want to tweak this message. And so he's inserting himself into Poseidon, who is Percy's father, and maybe creating a nicer version of that, because
no, Poseidon's always been like this. In fact, Poseidon, I mean, yes, but like Poseidon was like, really, he was actually more present in the book.
Okay.
Like he talks to Percy like a lot more.
I mean, he would join the long list of creators working through their complex feelings about their relationship with their parents and their relationship with their children through their art. I mean, Steven Spielberg jumps out most. Right, The Fabelmans is the most explicit answer, but a lot of Steven Spielberg's work, actually, you could argue kind of maybe is relating to, he had a very complex relationship with his father, or the guy he thought it was his father. If we want to subscribe to like an auteur theory, which isn't always really the way to go, but like if Poseidon feels like a bit of the Riordan self-insert, right? Of like that actually, even though it may not feel like it to my child, like I do always love you and I will support you and show up. If that's the way we want to take it. Maybe not. I don't know.
Well, I did like, there's the one scene where, are they at a bar or they're like at a restaurant, and Sally's up at the bar while Percy is like back not eating his ice cream, and Poseidon comes and like they talk and they have a conversation. That felt a little bit more realistic, of like these two people like still have a lot of love for each other but can't be together, and like weird family dynamics with their child, but they both still really care about each other and their child. And so that felt a little bit more real outside of the also I'm a god.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of when my parents would do like the divorced couple parking lot swap of their child. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. They don't even look at each other. And I'm like,
you can kind of see like the reluctance in Poseidon, that he like kind of wished he could be more present, or at least that was like, maybe in a perfect world, you know, we could have this family, but it's because of outside forces, whatever. I don't know. So that made him feel a little bit more sympathetic.
This again kind of calls back to bring it back to Annabeth, where Annabeth is kind of inundated in the demigod world of feeling like you need to prove yourself to earn love from your parents. And then Percy kind of says like, you know, that's not how it needs to be or should be. And at the end, so like the parting scene, Annabeth she's going with her dad to Disney World. Is that like reconnecting with her parents and like her kind of trying to be a normal kid? Because what I'm getting at is Athena, like to bring it back to Athena, who seems like kind of still in that, the vibe I get from this character, having only had her described by other characters, is that she's like the parent with like a checkboard for her kids or something that like demands like you must get into school X, Y, and Z, and like you will make varsity team of this by this year, and you will be first chair flute, like a very sort of demanding parent.
It's definitely giving like narcissistic, I want you to be the perfect version of me, and if you're not, then I don't love you.
Yeah. Or even like the divine equivalent of like really intense like sports parents or dance parents or performing
Pageant
arts
moms.
parents. Pageant moms, thank you. Like that kind of thing, right? That like put their kids through the rigmarole to maybe live vicariously. I don't know. This is all getting very Freudian, so maybe we should.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like Athena's, because like in the myths, she's born perfect, right? She has the armor, and she's one of Zeus's best creations, and all of that. And so I'm trying to get a sense of like, would he write her in a way that like she always felt that she needed to uphold this idea of perfection, and therefore she expects that in her children because like that's how she was raised, so to speak? Or did that perfection just come naturally easy to her that she couldn't understand why her own children wouldn't be capable of achieving that easily as well?
I have a list of things that like major changes they made, how I feel about them, and then like some things that they didn't change and how I feel about them. I think not changing Ares as a character was a missed opportunity, because I think a lot of times we miss out on this dichotomy that like, yes, Ares he's soldiers in the trenches and he's gunshots and bloodshed and the violence of warfare. But Athena is the war behind closed doors. It's making the decisions of drop the bombs here. It's we colonize this place. We argue that China deserves free trade just the way the rest of the world does, and then try and get their like people addicted to opium, which is also what they did with like the drug crisis in America that was actually like manufactured, because that's the whole thing.
Thanks, Reagan.
Yeah, so I think it's like an interesting look to look at like maybe Ares is the bloodshed, but Athena's kind of the mastermind, and I don't know. I think those are both sinister in their own ways.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that brings me to then the major storyline. I don't know, the subplot throughout that I kept watching, and I think I'm ultimately disappointed in by the end of this series. Is the Medusa storyline, because
me too.
had a ton of changes to it, right?
Yes.
And yeah, Hannah, I figured like once we saw the end result of how Gabe got the way he was, I was like, okay, Hannah's going to be pissed off too. It won't be just me this time.
I believe in killing abusers.
I was going to say, it's like, I think the best rewrite out of all of this would have been like Medusa actually just lets the kids go. And then, she actually feels a connection to Sally, because in episode 3, she calls them like, we're almost like sisters and stuff. And then she just goes and does Sally a solid and gets rid of Gabe for her. I feel like that would have been the perfect rewrite overall.
Big brain moment. That's so good. I would have loved that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that would have been great.
That would have taken care of all of the problems of the Medusa line, of this whole what makes something a monster or not monstrous, because they had no flipping idea what to do with that concept when it came to Medusa. They effed it up royally. So,
and she was so cool. Like, I loved her entire monster, if we want to call it that, design. She looked awesome. She was like sinister, but I don't know, there was like that weird niceness like coming through, and it was so good. I really liked Medusa.
My read is she, as like a monster to put to film, is this kind of inescapable like quicksand trap where you run into kind of conflicting interests, where you kind of have this adventure hero story, and then you have Medusa, and like no property or film or anything can like, they can't resist, like, we gotta chop off Medusa's head. And then, but also there's this whole other baggage that popular culture is increasingly aware and commenting on and building off of just like, well, like the more we know about Medusa's story, the less chopping off her head feels like a righteous act, and the ickier it feels. And a lot of properties, this one, I mean, the most egregious example of this, I think, is in the 2010 Clash of the Titans.
Absolutely.
Where there's like a rewritten scene where the Gemma Adderton character explains to Percy is like Medusa's whole tragic backstory. And then like not even 3 scenes later, they're like, let's chop this, Bridget's head off. And it just feels like it's this weird like whiplash disconnect. And what I'm getting at is that like the show or the property or the film or whatever, like it can't resist the like having a scary Medusa hunting people like in a sort of forest of statues, and you can't look at her and like the terror and how scary that monster is with the simultaneous impulse to want to really humanize and empathize with her. And then these two things kind of butt heads against one another and create this discord.
Yeah, that was what I was conflicted with. This like, I kind of do believe Medusa had to be slayed in this series just because that is generally how the Medusa story goes. I think what was so upsetting about it was the fact that like the kids showed no remorse over it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I got the point of mailing her head to the gods. And then the fact that they literally just mailed it back, returned to sender, forgave Divine. It's like, but like
bitches for you.
It's like, I thought I would have been upset had they just kept using it as a tool because, that's what Perseus did. And it's like, okay, that's really offensive. It's like just having her head sent back and forth, like no one really wants it.
Yeah.
Is like almost worse.
So icky.
I think Sally would have put her to rest at the very least.
Yeah.
It's almost like Medusa does like one last favor for someone who's almost her sister.
Yeah. Which I think would have been a cool. It's like, you know what? Just cut the, she can have beef with Poseidon and still have like, she did have a sense of like, I want to help out Percy because I understand his mother's predicament. And like, I feel like if you really wanted to rewrite that in the best positive way, just have them like come to an understanding or have the kids escape. And then maybe Medusa reflects on the fact it's like, hey, I've been going about things wrong. I've been taking it out on the wrong people and go and do a solid for Sally. Or maybe, I don't know, team up with Luke and go against the gods. Like how cool would that be?
That does happen.
Okay, that's not surprising because that jives.
I was going to ask, and at first I was like, well, maybe this is a consolation, but I'm like, no, this might be worse because in the universe, it's a thing that like monsters don't ever really die, right? Whenever they're slain, they just kind of take like a time out and then get reincarnated.
Yeah, they reform in Tartarus and make their way out.
Yeah, like that's how you can have like the Minotaur, like Theseus slayed him, but yet here the Minotaur is. So like in some way that's almost worse because Medusa is just doomed to this eternal repetitiveness of just keeps getting her head chopped off.
Yeah,
that's awful.
But we let Procrustes keep his head.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, that was the other thing that pissed me off was like in chapter 7 or episode 7, it's like, oh, we have a known serial killer. We'll just leave him trapped in the waterbed.
Oh my God.
Doesn't even call up camp and be like, hey, we've got a rogue demigod here. Do we have like some kind of system to handle that?
Well, this is also where the world building maybe gets a little weird, and because like Procrustes, is he a monster? Is he a demigod? Is there a distinction? Like,
yeah,
like the line between like who and what these beings are gets like weirdly slippy.
Yeah, because Procrustes is just a demigod, right?
He should be.
What is he doing living forever? Like, what is he doing like respawning?
This is my own fault for maybe I should have looked this up, but like I was not aware that Procrustes even is a demigod. In my mind, he's just like some bandit that Theseus kills. But I just understand these as like Theseus just kills a bunch of bandits on his way back to Athens, and they're all like kind of thematized and sort of fun and goofy. But
yeah.
Sort of fun and goofy.
That's definitely a definition of fun.
That's because Theseus is the knockoff Hercules.
Yes, he's the like patriotic civic Hercules for Athens. But there's a
guy who's
yes, exactly. There's a guy whose whole thing is that he ties you to pine trees and flings you into the air. There's a guy who kicks you off a cliff and for a turtle to eat you.
It's so funny. It's so
these
good.
are like characters from One Piece, like right? They're not like
yes.
actual.
So I recently read something that was kind of mind-blowing in terms of, so we know that gods don't like miasma being infected in their spaces, right? Because they don't want to be touched by anything that is reminiscent of being mortal. So blood, childbirth, all of that, right? Have you ever thought about like when Athena turns Arachne or Medusa, like this idea that it's actually the gods polluting humans, but instead of polluting them with mortality, they're polluting them with immortality, with essence of the god.
Ooh.
Right? And I'm like,
Weird.
mind blown. And I went to,
that.
I thought about Korra. And when you see Avatar 1 and they're living with the spirits, and the spirits can like possess the body and you slowly take on the traits of that spirit and once they remove themselves. And I'm just like, so that's what a monster is, someone infected with immortality.
I like this.
I've got a bunch of articles to write this semester, so I might pilfer that.
I'll let you know my source. So I'm doing stuff for a conference at Camus, and I'm like, yeah, they were basically talking about like, in sacred disease, why do people turn to magical practitioners to deal with epilepsy if they have this idea that they're being seized by humans, but the treatments are not to like be purified in sanctuaries. It's actually to like remove pollution from the person and then like discard it where no one else could possibly touch it and be infected about it. And they're like, that's what this is. It's like, it's pollution of the gods entering mortals.
Ooh.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
I like that.
Sometimes reading academic books is fun. Not always. Sometimes. Sometimes you're like, ooh, I like that. That's fun.
Sometimes I just buy textbooks and read them for fun. Like the little killjoy I am.
Well, and the reason I thought of that was because, like, I can't remember if it's Colin or Elijah brought up the point, but like, and I think that's what makes me upset about the series is they never explain that about monsters. They never tell you, oh, don't worry, just Perseus kills a minotaur, and yeah, you saw it kill his mom, but I don't know, I'd be a little freaked out. I would definitely would have been freaked out after Medusa, and no one stops and explains, like, don't worry, they'll pop back out of Tartarus. They'll be fine. There's like literally no like remorse for doing these things. It was like, I would be very traumatized if I had to like, even in self-defense, like kick a dog from biting me.
Chop off a woman's head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I don't know.
So
I can kind of understand from like an abused kid perspective. It's very easy to compartmentalize because like we got to be real. That's what Percy was. He was abused.
But I think that's what is so hard about this series, and being someone who didn't actually read the book, I think there was some context that really needed to be present there to make some of the things happening in the show a lot less icky. Because because it was just hard to understand. And I think that's what was a really hard premise of turning 12-year-olds into heroes. And it's not necessarily wrong to say that like 12-year-olds in the ancient world might have had to resort to things like this, to like killing other people and things like that. That was a harsh reality.
People, you're in the army by the time you're like in your late teens or something like that.
But we're pretending these kids are just fine with having to do that.
It is the kind of maybe YA fantasy kind of thing where it's like Eli said, I think at the beginning of the episode, like there's a lot of violence and ickiness baked into a lot of these myths. That's just sort of inherent as part of the DNA. And then when you port it to a sort of PG-13, PG kind of audience, you have to be like, oh, but don't worry, it's okay. We killed the Minotaur, but like, don't worry, he's not really dead. It's not the same as like, he just turns into a pile of dust. It's not the same as like, if you ever have to, and I don't recommend this for anyone, but if you ever have to like kill a pig to like eat, it's kind of rough. But like the point is like killing the Minotaur is not the same as like actually killing a cow.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, Medusa and like actually chopping off a woman's head.
I think that's why I struggle with the Percy Jackson, because I like a lot of young adult series, but it's because, like Hunger Games, how f***ed up Katniss is after everything.
That's the whole point of the series, right?
Exactly. And that's just a difference of writing for like high school level versus middle school level. And I totally understand, like, you've got to sanitize things as you go younger and younger. But I still think there's got to be ways to contextualize information. Like, have you guys seen Bluey at all?
Mm-hmm. You watch a lot of Bluey these days, right?
I do. I love Muffin. Oh, love Muffin. But they'll tie in like certain storylines that like deal with miscarriage. There's a whole episode about infertility. There's the whole episode that like, and it's not talking directly, it's definitely talking around it, but in a very successful way for, that's why adults love watching it with their kids, because it's like, I know what's going on and it's going to go over my kid's head, but like I feel seen for like my experiences in the shoes of the parents of the, you know, the characters. And it's still really enjoyable for them to watch. And like they touch on some really interesting even like trauma. They recontextualize into the whole scene.
Like being left alone at the playground.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah. It's really well done. So it's like, I know it can be done. It's like, because here I am watching a show for elementary age school kids and loving it. So like, it can be done. I know it can, but it's going to be done to various degrees of success.
Yeah. Well, and
Me with Miraculous Ladybug.
Yeah.
I also like that one. So
I critique it, but I like it.
I wanted to talk about Kronos and Luke, which we haven't talked about yet. And the final revelation of just generally like, you know, our thoughts about Luke. Because I really liked, you know, again, most of what I'm contrasting this against is the movie where Luke was very obviously the villain and gets a little mustache twirly, particularly in the sequel, where I really liked how Luke was set up in the show as like the
older brother figure.
Yes. Yeah. And but more than that, but he's the cool kid that takes you under his wing and he's super nice. And he's like exactly that kind of guy that when you're like a freshman in high school and like a junior or a senior is nice and cool to you and he's popular and it feels so awesome and you have this connection. And so it really hammers in like the betrayal at the end. And not just for Percy, but for Annabeth, especially, who has like a much longer relationship for Luke. One of the things I appreciated about the show was how Luke, I thought, was handled with a much defter hand than he was in the movies.
I completely agree.
Yeah, it's a lot more similar to how he's handled in the books. I have this whole thing about Luke. I like how I saw someone say that like Rick Riordan isn't really adapting The Lightning Thief so much as he's rewriting it as he would have written it today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really agree with that, especially like when we see things like Luke and his behavior. First of all, a moment of silence for all the TikTok girlies who were absolutely convinced he was not the traitor and were making the little edits for him. In a world of boys, he's a gentleman. They are screaming, crying, throwing up right now.
They probably still defend him, right? People are still standing for Soldier Boy and the boys, and that guy's like a mass murderer. And like, I mean, again, the airtight defense is if he's bad, why is he so hot?
If bad, why hot? Them's the rules.
Honestly, yeah. But the thing is, Luke does bad shit, but he's right. At the end of the day, he is right. Like, he doesn't go about it in the correct way, in any way, shape, or form. But he is correct. The gods mistreat them. And that's what I think is so interesting, that, like, we start off the first episode with Percy's narration about, like, look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. And then we start the last episode with, look, I know you didn't want to be a half-blood. Because Luke truly is just Percy a few years older. Around, like, the Heroes of Olympus saga, when Percy has been through hell, he's part of like a second prophecy about saving the world, which he is very disgruntled about. Him and Annabeth had this moment where they're like, maybe Luke was right. And Luke is right. He just went about it in the wrong way. We can't just like kill everyone.
Well, like the best villains, I feel like, come from a place
are the ones that are like understandable.
And Percy has that connection with him. And they do talk about that, right? They're like, you thought for a second he was saying things that made sense.
Yeah.
Well, and Chiron says that at the end. Chiron's like, Luke's not wrong, right?
Yeah.
And like, what I'm worried about is that you're going to agree with Luke.
Yeah.
Or have reason to agree with Luke.
The other touch that I liked was because they're going over, him and Luke are going the prophecy together, and they're like, I don't see what I did as a betrayal to you. I did this because I actually care about you.
Wait, I wrote the line down because it f***ed me up so bad. He gets to the part about the betrayal, and there's a tense moment of silence, and then Luke goes, I didn't think you'd give him to Grover to wear. Like, that's not an apology. That's, I didn't mean for him to get hurt. It was okay for you to get hurt. And that, I think they handled that confrontation between them so well. Better than the books, in my opinion. Way better than the movie, of course. I didn't think you'd give them to Grover to wear. That would break my heart. And then, of course, like, Percy and Luke are fighting. And Percy accidentally nicks him, and he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. And Luke takes this moment of vulnerability to slash at Percy because that's their difference. That's their core difference. Luke has been hardened and turned cruel.
Yeah.
Side note, that moment also just cracked me up so much because it was so Disney in that no one showed any blood or scratches.
I
Because
know, right?
it looked like he swiped right at his stomach, and like his shirt is perfectly intact. It's like, where did you even cut him? And then Percy's holding his arm, and then it's perfectly fine.
In the same way that we have to have a casino where nobody is drinking or smoking.
Right.
I would go to a VR casino though. That'd be fun.
Well, the Lotus Casino is a bit different in the books. It's got like big movie theaters and an indoor ski slope. It's like a very coked out Dave and Buster's.
Well, and to be fair, that's what a lot of actual casinos in Vegas like. I went to Circus and rode a roller coaster inside of it. So like, there you
God,
go.
I love roller coasters.
So we like Luke on the whole.
Oh,
Yes.
I like his characterization. I was sad in the first few episodes that we didn't get the scene where like he teaches Percy how to disarm an opponent. Is like one of the first scenes in the books because he's a Camp Half-Blood for like a month before he leaves on his quest. And so I was happy we got that flashback. And like it was also obviously Luke likes spending time with him and he is his friend to an extent, but it was also they were training by themselves. He was feeding him this rhetoric. He was preparing him. Grooming sounds like sexually predatory, but like he was grooming him for, he was like grooming him for this role.
Yeah.
For sure.
As for Kronos, question, because this is one that I threw to Hannah a long time ago. It's like, why a lantern? Why does he look like a wraith?
I assumed it was because he's like supposed to be been imprisoned for so long, so he's like wraith-like and gross and creepy.
Where's his sickle? Like that's literally what the death.
I think Luke's got it. I think that's
I
what
know.
Yeah.
Okay. He Backbiter. That's the name of the sword. It's melted down. It's half celestial bronze and then like half gold, so it can kill mortals and gods alike.
Wow. Okay.
Great.
I will say Backbiter is a fucking dope name.
Yeah, that is baller.
I don't think they ever said Riptide for Percy's.
They
They
mentioned it
did.
a lot in the thing. It did come up.
Did it?
Yeah, at one point or something like that. And then in the trailer, they played Vance Joy song, the like Riptide.
Oh yeah.
That was such like. Usually I hate remixes, but that slapped. A quote I really liked from Zeus. I really enjoyed Zeus's entire diatribe and everything he said. What I really enjoyed was like the line is like, that is what we do. We snap and plot and strive. It was only a matter of time before he did it again. And I feel like that's just like that. Yeah, that just comes back on the cyclical nature of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is so present throughout the books.
And the myths with the whole, there's this constant theme. I mean, Hesiod is the most obvious example, but just any stories about Zeus and Kronos and Uranus and all these guys, and even Zeus's children is this like
Athena.
Fathers overthrow sons, overthrow sons, overthrow sons, repeat ad infinitum. I like that Zeus is kind of set up as this like corporate man, right? Because it's like, yeah, of course, like somebody's always gunning for my job, but like that's why I'm the boss man, right? Because like I know how to like fend off the sharks and keep my spot, right? So like I run Olympus, like I run this business, and it's all very cutthroat and Darwinian.
CEO of Olympus.
Yeah, but it's also your family.
Yeah. So it's Succession, basically.
They did so many of the gods so well.
Especially Lin-Manuel. He really came in. I love the commitment he had to the bit. The costume did really well. He really kind of sold it.
Why was he in a hoodie?
It wasn't at all like he just walked in his like $700 hoodie.
Listen, Hermes is supposed to be the god with the most demigod children. You're telling me Lin-Manuel Miranda? They were like, yeah, Lin-Manuel Miranda like that.
I don't even want to open up this dimension of does Lin-Manuel have any children?
Oh gosh.
I'm getting a resounding no. He absolutely does not. He has 2.
So other than that, who was your favorite depictions of gods? Like that's what I want to know.
I like Dionysus.
I know.
Dionysus. I'm going to be in the minority. I kind of felt they didn't give Jason Mantzoukas enough to do because he was more.
He needed way more.
He needed a lot more time on screen. Yeah.
It felt like he was just being a jerk all the time, and he didn't get to actually be very funny a lot.
Well,
I still love
that
him.
is his character. He's really good in the musical. He has like a song called like Another Terrible Day, where it's just like, one of his lines is like, "You hate it here? Well, I hated it first." And it's just about how he does not care. And he's like going through like the campers who are coming to him with his problems. And he's like, "Oh, I hate to break it to you, but that bitch is cheating on you with a nymph. That's why you got attacked. Stay away from the Pegasi. That's why you got thrown off." And he's just being like a terrible role model, but I love it so much. I enjoy the musical so much.
And it's such a weird premise that Riordan comes up with, because it's basically Dionysus sober, right? Like,
Yeah.
He's in like rehab, or he's cut off. He's gone cold turkey, and he's resentful of the whole thing.
Which is interesting, but it's like, I don't understand why that was necessary, because like, does Dionysus ever really do anything that bad while drunk?
I mean,
how do you feel about Sparagmos?
Those are his followers. You are not responsible for the behavior of other party goers.
If my cult followers rip apart another party guest, which for listeners out there, Sparagmos is this term where the followers of Dionysus will tear people and animals and everything they encounter apart limb from limb, which happens not infrequently.
Yeah, major party foul.
If I am the leader of a cult or a religious unit and my followers rip somebody apart limb from limb, I feel like I would be put on the hook for that, but maybe that's just me.
But should he stop drinking because of that?
Well,
or should he just not party
Peeping
with
Toms
people?
deserve to get spragmatized.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it? What's his name?
Pentheus.
It is Pentheus. Okay. Yeah. Was anyone upset with Pentheus by the end? Dionysus gave him a lot of chances, and Pentheus did not take them.
He came to him as a twink. He came to him as a god. He was like, I'm letting you, come on, dude. There's so many options here.
And Pentheus chose poorly.
This is my favorite review of a myth ever.
For listeners out there, we encourage you to read Euripides' Bacchae, which is a story about basically what if the dad from Footloose was torn apart by the children at the dance hall.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, I really liked Dionysus, and I wish he had been on screen more. And I think my second favorite would probably be Ares. He was so much fun.
The only problem I have with Ares' characterization is Ares is a girl dad, canonically. He, like, what do you mean he doesn't care about his children? Ares loves his children. He's the dad of the Amazons. Ares is a girl dad, and I stand by that.
He seems like the dad with a bunch of daughters who are like captains of their respective sports teams. And he's super gung-ho about it. And they're out there, like, one of them is out there like tugging the other one's ponytail. Like, it's one of them is that girl in the video that the college soccer player
game
who like yanks the other player down with the ponytail. That's a daughter of Ares, if ever there was one.
Yeah. I wonder if it was just a front, like Ares pretending not to, because what I did like is he had his own thing kind of going, but he was also like the most helpful to the demigods overall. I know it was conniving, but.
So a thought that's forming right now is we met Hephaestus very briefly, and Hephaestus's general energy in this and other media is kind of a sad boy. I don't fit in with my family. It's all I'm meditating on the way they've hurt me and all the betrayals and all this kind of stuff. And my thesis that I'll put forward is Ares is secretly just as much of a sad boy as Hephaestus.
Oh, absolutely.
Dude, if you go back to our minisode on that, I was actually looking up the ancient sources on both of them. They're surprisingly similar in many ways.
And they have different. So Hephaestus is, if we want to like put him on the Freudian couch for a second, right? He's the sole child of Hera, and who throws him out, at least in some versions. There's other versions where Zeus casts him out from Olympus.
Her or Zeus, depending. Yeah. So for
his disfigurement. Parental love never came easily to him. It was only through his inventions and, like, again, having to prove himself to his parents, something that him and Annabeth can probably relate to, is what sort of earns his place back in Olympus. And Ares is one of the only children of Zeus and Hera, and has no love from either parent. And famously, there's a part in the Iliad where Zeus basically says to Ares, like, if you weren't my child, I would have thrown you into Tartarus. This is how much I dislike you.
Yeah.
And he can never do anything right. In that same scene, he's constantly complaining about how Athena is the sort of favored daughter. She gets away with everything. He's like this troubled youth in revolt, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's always been like once I got older, that became like my interpretation of him. Mostly because I think like a lot of the modern interpretations of the Greek gods kind of suck.
It's kind of funny, though, how the Romans end up depicting him in his relationship with Aphrodite, which is almost like a very loving family man, and like because they're usually surrounded by their children together, and that's why his characterization as a daddy's girl or their girl daddy, what?
A girl dad,
girl dad, that thing.
Daddy's girl, Aries.
I'm used to like labeling my
iterations.
cats in that regard.
If you want to smoke and hot take, that's because I actually think Mars and Aries aren't the same god, but
I mean, that's totally fair.
Ooh.
That's totally fair.
or if they may be like way back in, Indo-European history, but Mars is a very sort of completely different entity. He's this patron figure. He's an agricultural god for the Romans.
Yeah.
In Greek literature and tradition, he's this kind of like, the term I would use is he's kind of a Kyle. Like he's just this bratty little punk who's like constantly punching holes in the wall and like doing tricks on his dirt bike. But in Rome, he's like kind of a more like paternal figure. He's this ancestor hero. He's like the Roman god. I mean, he's one of the main deities. He's also like, a god of fertility, a god of all these other things. And so he has a little bit more of a like status prestige attached to him. And part of it is like, yes, they're both war gods, but who isn't a war god in this world? But
The Kyle to girl dad pipeline.
truly. Has a study been done on that? Because if not,
Yeah, right.
The other thing that was interesting about him and Hephaestus is that Hephaestus is a lot more vicious to his family than Ares is. And Hephaestus even actually, because of the cheating Ares does with his wife Aphrodite, when Harmonia gets married, he makes a cursed necklace for her. So like he even goes up against Ares a couple times himself. Is like, of the two, I would not want to mess with. Probably Hephaestus is like
No, that
my
makes
pick.
sense. Yeah.
Petty king. Something that I don't know, it probably wasn't meant to be something that made you sad or was viewed as tragic. But when Grover's like, well, isn't there anything there's no chance you can just like say all that in an email. And Percy goes like, where's the glory in that? That actually kind of felt sinister to me. Like he has successfully been indoctrinated into this idea. And of course, he still has Sally, and he still holds the gods to higher standards than the other demigods tend to do. But I was just like, no, babe. please.
Yeah.
absolutely. Like I think maybe if I had one critique of the show overall, it is that the sort of interesting questions and ideas and critiques of this whole system that get introduced in the first 4 episodes, give or take, get a little bit undermined by kind of just the impulse to buy into the whole thing a little bit. Partially, I think for the sake of fun or because it will look cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a similar thought of when he said, I'm tired of running away from monsters, but like, not saying he's not afraid of Zeus, but just like Zeus isn't necessarily deserving of respect. Then we get that flashback of Luke. It's like, you got to be careful because things that are small but scary tend to get squished. And then like the amount
Great line.
Yeah, the amount of deference that Percy ends up showing Zeus in his presence is like, but at the same time, it's like, but I would also expect a 12-year-old boy to be like in front of his friends, say one thing and then act a totally different way.
Sure.
He almost gets himself lightning bolted.
Yeah, for sure.
That's Percy's whole thing.
Yeah.
He's always pissing somebody off. I thought the fight with Ares I thought all the fight scenes are really well choreographed.
Yeah, they're fun.
I thought it was a bit disappointing when Percy just like called up a big wave, because in the books he gets like knocked back into the water and that's what like gives him the strength. But I did like that he wasn't that good with a sword. Like he was fine for a 12-year-old, but I appreciated like the jerky movements and how he kind of just like lunged and he wasn't very like concerned about like his center of gravity. And then when he does finally get that cut on Ares, it's just like a desperate strike.
Yeah, and I liked that the way that they set it up. It's like, okay, we'll set the rules. It's just a first blood. So Percy is like, I can't beat this guy in an actual fight. I just need to get the first cut in.
Yeah, but then you know what an Odysseus type of hero would have done and what I would have done? Myself, and called it a day. It's like, hey, I said whoever draws first blood, I win.
Well, yeah, but they had something on the line.
No, but that's the cunning aspect of, right?
I think this is a letter of the law, spirit of the law thing. I think it's assumed underwritten other person's blood, like not just any blood. On the movement and choreography, I did want to shout out Aryan Samadri. One of the things I saw when I was watching the making of was, obviously he's in goat legs, but like he worked with a movement coach where when they're filming, he has these bands, like these kind of CGI bands, basically like socks that are where they're going to animate the goat legs. And if you watch carefully, like when you see it more obviously when it's not CGI'd already, that he's walking in a certain way to kind of mimic the way like you wouldn't walk with human feet, you'd walk with goat feet. So like his movements are like kind of jerky and his heels don't touch the ground because he's got hooves and things like that. There's like little stuff like that I thought are what puts the attention and care to detail for that kind of thing, kind of puts it over for me.
I think there's so much like the casting, the chemistry between the three main protagonists, the fleshing out of Sally and Percy's relationship was really well done as well. The good and the bad. And then the special effects, like when he's trapped on the throne and the cogs of gold like start to engulf him. It was beautiful. And it's so weird because it's like there's so many parts of this series that feel amazing, like far outdo the movie. But I'm kind of with Lige too. It's like, but at the end of the day, there's something about the story that just doesn't grab me in the way at the end. I think there's enough there to keep me interested to like keep going and hope like there's growth from, book one to, like Hannah mentioned, there being growth in later books that I could eventually like get really on board with everything. But for me right now, it's not quite there, but like all the pieces are there to make it work.
Yeah, I saw someone say the other day that like we need to give it a moment. Like if you look back at the golden age of television and their words, Gossip Girl and the Vampire Diaries and stuff. Listen, I didn't say that's how I feel about it.
I mean, I watched those shows religiously.
I like the Vampire Diaries just in a trashy way. But the girls again, they love that
shit. The golden age of television was CW in the 2010s.
That's where I thought that was going. Like
oh my god!
No, the thing is, like, I don't disagree. Like,
right? Their point was the first seasons were not good, but like we've got to this point with like streaming and shit that if the first season doesn't like absolutely knock it out of the park, then it gets canceled and it doesn't have the chance to grow.
Yeah.
Like one of the side effects of demanding, like, I mean, not so long ago, television shows used to be not good. There was a lot of really bad TV out, and now they just, for better, well, I think for better, like the general accepted standard of quality is much higher, right? And even to the point where like shows come out and even if I don't love them, I'm like, they're okay. And like thinking back, I'm like, no, this like on average, this was so much better produced and written and acted than so many other like prior shows. Like, this is a great show, but like early seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something like that. Or I mean, even like first season, like HBO and like The Sopranos and those kind of things like changed the game a little bit. But like there was a lot of popular shows. If you go back and watch the earlier seasons, and like first season of Parks and Rec, a little bit rough.
Yeah.
A little bit rough.
And like, to that point, like they have to, it's such a unstable, uncertain future for shows and art. Like even like, I'm worried that Netflix's Sandman's like not going to get renewed, which I thought that was like as good as anyone could hope a TV show could be.
They got a season 2.
Yeah, they
do.
Good.
Yeah, they got renewed.
But even that was like,
well, and just because you're renewed, it's like we saw with Blood of Zeus is like, okay, we know for sure we got another season, but we have no idea when it's actually going to go into production. Like,
yeah,
there have been shows that were nominally renewed and that's since been canceled because it's also unclear, I guess, also following the writer's strike, if the studios are going to use that as an excuse to like start.
And Disney has this very interesting thing, at least with a lot of their animated shows, that like they would never do more than 3 seasons. So like even when you had beloved series like Kim Possible or something, it's like
there's a very bleak reason for that. which I learned during the writer's strike, because it's when you have a show run past a certain point, you are entitled to certain amounts of raises and things like that. So very often if shows go past a certain point, they will get rebranded or retitled. So if you're going to like hire all the writers or crew or anything like that, again, you don't have to give them the raise that they would get if a show ran for like, say, 4 seasons.
Okay. I'm glad that I know what that the reason is, because if the reason is like we want to give writers or creators like a sense of when to end it, so they, series that end when they know when they need to end are always the best, right? And if you have an end after 3 seasons, it's like,
we're all
okay,
thinking Avatar: The Last Airbender, just to say it out loud.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I was also thinking about, I don't know if y'all have seen Orphan Black.
No, I have not.
Oh, it's one of my favorite shows. They like fans were like begging for it to continue on. It won an Emmy, and one of my favorite shows, but they were just like, we're going to end here. We planned it out for here. I love when things know when to end.
My office mates and I were having this exact conversation where like, this is like a huge difference between particularly British and American television shows, where like a British series will be like limited series, X amount of episodes, done. And then American series will be like, we'll keep renewing, and then it's still popular, so we'll renew, and then we renew, and then and then you get into the later seasons of The Office or whatever it is, and then kind of it overstates its welcome a little bit.
Yeah. I recently finished season 4 of Barry, and I
love that show.
That show is spectacular, beautifully written, so well produced. Bill Hader is incredible.
I love Bill Hader. He's so good.
Ended it perfectly. Like, I can't see another way that could have ended, and it was perfect. It was like,
I haven't seen the last season yet, but
oh my god, it's so weird. It's so wild.
I usually don't care about like waiting for men to snap, like Walter White type shit.
But that's like, he starts off the rails, right? So it's like he's not even.
I love watching like the tension build as he gets more and more, and then he just good show. I love that show.
Okay, so this discussion brings me to like one question is like, where do we, I don't think they've declared a season 2, but I suspect this has been the most successful thing Disney Plus streaming's put out in a long time. So I imagine they're going to keep going with it. How long do you think Disney will milk the franchise? Because I think someone had mentioned there's a lot of books.
There's a lot of material.
Yeah, there's a lot of material.
I would defer to Hannah because I don't know if there's a natural stopping point for them.
Yeah, what would be a logical stopping point, you think?
Honestly, I've read the Heroes of Olympus books, but I personally like to just stop the series after the original 5, the original 5 Percy Jackson books. They did recently, Rick Riordan did recently release a 6th, and it's about the original trio, like Annabeth, Grover, and Percy have to go on like a quest one more time to get recommendation letters from gods to go to college in New Rome, which is a whole setup it's a whole setup that's put up in like the Heroes of Olympus series. I'm going to read that one because nostalgia, but Heroes of Olympus isn't bad. It's just a very different tone, and it's not one I particularly enjoy for the Percy Jackson series. And then once you go off that, you've got like the Magnus Chase books, which are like Magnus Chase is Annabeth's cousin, and he's part of like Norse mythology. And then after that, you've got Nico D'Angelo and Will Solas have like Solis have like their own spin-off recently, like called like The Sun and the Star. And there's the Trials of Apollo. There are like 5 of those books.
So what I'm hearing is the smart decision would be to end at season 5, but the Disney decision will be to do all
I don't
of
know.
it.
I mean, the producer in me just went like, I just see dollar signs.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what I said. Disney's going all of it. We're going to Marvelize this thing now.
I mean, yeah, case in point.
Yeah.
I think the best change they made from the book, by far, Sally. Because in the book, she is very much just there to be rescued. She, in fact, like there's even a line that's like, Mom never gets angry. And it's like, she is not a real person in the books. I immensely love the changes. At first, I was kind of like unsure about it, but I really appreciated all the nuance they added to her character. And in the end, you can see that like, she's still preparing him. She taught him ancient Greece. She tells him these stories. She primes him for like, who to like know who he is before he's put in this world. And even at the end, it's like Percy wakes up from this nightmare with Kronos, and he like just tells his mom, and she whips out a journal where they've been like writing it down, because now she is a proactive, real character in the story. And I love her.
Yeah.
Also, for disability rep, there's like, since 2005, there's been like a big correlation between like ADHD and autism and how that goes together. And especially how like autism will be missed in girls and it'll be missed in young women of color, especially. People of color like go extremely underdiagnosed. So I don't know. I know they're not going to like say it because it's Disney, but I don't know. Annabeth very much gave the TISM vibes, and I really appreciated that about her. But there's this one point where Sally says like, oh, you know, it's for kids with learning differences. Just say disabilities. Like, it's like when people are like, oh, like sometimes I've had people like refer to me as like differently abled, and I'm like, yeah, I am different. I'm worse.
I think the other thing that was cool was, and I think an important change was Hephaestus, because Riordan's original description of him was horrible. And then the actor they cast for Hephaestus actually had suffered a stroke a couple of years ago, so he actually does walk with a cane. So that was really cool that they incorporated that, because that is like the one cool thing to consider about Hephaestus as a god is like, how many of your gods were born with a physical disability and they're still badass for what they do? So it's like, I think that's really important to represent that.
I agree big time. I meant to ask earlier, I was going to ask what y'all think your cabin would be, or like who your godly parent would be.
Exactly the closing question I was angling towards. So
perfect.
Like, yeah, to finish up, like where would we be placed if, you know, I mean, if we're going to apply like sorting hat rules and you get to pick your own cabin, but whose cabin do you think you would be in if you were to be in Camp Half-Blood?
God. Can I give two answers? Like the answer I would have given at the age of which I would have been at camp versus the answer I would give now? Because I know the difference. I would have definitely been in Athena's camp as a young kid, because I
think I agree.
Yeah, I consider like I was the smart kid in a small rural school that I knew everyone since kindergarten through 12th grade, and that was my whole identity, and I had to be perfect in that regard. So like that sense of striving for perfection for approval definitely would have put me in Athena's camp. And I think I did like Athena a lot more when I was younger. That has changed dramatically since then. Now I would... I don't know enough about like what the cabins are like actually culturally. The fact that they fully removed Aphrodite's camp or cabin.
She doesn't really have any like, they're not really prominent characters from the Aphrodite cabin until book 3.
Yeah. So I'd probably say Hermes. A good combination of like, I just associate cleverness, but not also, and like work ethic with that more than like striving for perfection for the sake of perfection. So I think that would be the shift I would see for myself.
I think I was also going to say Hermes for myself, but for a very specific Hermes characteristic, as that is the psychopompous, because I work with the dead
there you
in
go.
a lot of different aspects. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So, and I don't know if like Hades doesn't seem nice. So
well, he's one of the, that's forbidden, but does he have children?
Yeah, he does have children. He has 2 kids. They're in the Lotus Hotel. Actually, you can hear them in the background of the episode. Like one of them is like Nico is like cheering his sister on. Christy and I discussed this. He's actually kind of like one of the best parents out of the gods. I know you don't
Maybe
expect
I'll go
it.
with Hades then.
Yeah, he very much has like the vibes of like a single mom who works 2 jobs, loves her kids, and never stops.
I love that.
Yeah, he's actually a pretty good dad. Like he gives Nico an allowance, and he's just like, you don't want to stay at camp? Yeah, you can come live with me.
Nice.
Okay.
I go back and forth because if I just say Aphrodite cabin, then people are like, but I don't know. I kind of think Aphrodite cabin.
I think post Barbie movie, like if that's how Riordan had described it, but like now post Barbie movie, you're like, it can be the enlightened Barbie Aphrodite cabin, and it's great.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at, like one of the reasons I'm good at journalism is because I'm pretty good at like talking my way around what I want, which is like something the charms, like is like charm speak, which is associated with the Aphrodite cabin.
You got the Riz.
The TISM Riz, as they say.
Millennials are going to kill that phrase because they're like, I learned a new word that gets me with the youngins. All right, Colin?
I'm trying to find the best way to phrase like in the least sad way, but I would definitely be in Dionysus's retinue. I'd be one of his, and not just because my propensity and fondness for fermented beverages, but also because I just crave chaos. And I love watching situations spill out into uncontrollable messes that I don't know, it's like chicken noodle soup for me.
Do you also just not remember your students' names at all and make them up?
No, I'm actually
spot?
really good about that pretty usually. All right. Should we end it? We're almost at an hour and 40 minutes, so we should probably end it here for everybody's sanity. And also because Christy, it's almost, I guess it's
late.
10 p.m.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all for listening to this very all-encompassing Percy Jackson major-sode, not a mini-sode, a major-sode. Thank you, Hannah, for joining us. It was really fun to have you in on this.
Thank you for having me.
As always, you guys can follow us on Instagram, where Christy does a lot of fun things. And you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.
Bye.
Bye.